We're delighted to have you with us. Happy Election Day. We thought it was quite fitting to, and I see some people have on vote t-shirts. Thank you, Dr. Strasser, for that. So yes, happy Election Day. We are thrilled to have you with us to celebrate women's voices on a very important day with a terrific speaker today. I'm delighted to have her. My name is Dr. Julie Haynes. I am the director of the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Rowan University. We are an affiliate of the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Florida International University. We are delighted to have Dr. Copenhagen with us today. I saw her somewhere, so hello, Dr. Copenhagen. Happy for you to be joining us today. I said welcome instead of good afternoon because I'm excited to let you know that we have participants joining us from every time zone. So some people might still be morning. Last count, I think we had 9 or 10 different states. So we are delighted to have not only Florida International University with us, but also our sister affiliates, which are located at Marymount University in Virginia and Stevens College in Missouri, Cal State Fullerton, which is, of course, in California. And again, just delighted to have everyone here. I want to mention that the event is being recorded. And so make note of that. And if you have any questions for our speakers, please put those in the chat. So I will introduce her in just a second, but the format of today's program is going to be, Donna Rubin is going to be speaking with us for about 10 or 15 minutes at the top of the hour. If you've joined us for events before, we tend to jump into the Q&A right away, but she's got some amazing information, some fantastic visuals and things that I ask her to share with us. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker for today, Donna Rubin, who has her BA from Yale and her MA from University of Texas, is the CEO of Speech Studio and the founder and curator of the world's largest online database of women's speeches, which she has called Speaking While Female. Her commitment to uncovering and highlighting women's voices in all their diversity is reflected both in the online database and in her forthcoming book, Speaking While Female, 75 Extraordinary Speeches by American Women. A former award-winning journalist, Rubin also works as a consultant and speechwriter, and she's had such notable clients as CBS, PepsiCo, and Martha Stewart. She is a sought-after public speaker. Again, we're delighted to have her with us. I have seen her speak before, and she was generous enough to agree to speak again for the center. She was just on C-SPAN being interviewed about her archive and her forthcoming book, which is, if you can Google it on C-SPAN and watch that as well. It's fascinating. And she volunteers extensively as a debate judge, communication and writing mentor. And I'm thrilled to mention that she also serves on the advisory board for the Leadership Council for the Center at Rowan University. So without further ado, Donna, I will let you enlighten us and talk about women's voices. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Rowan University. Thank you to the Center, Lillian Copenhagen, and Karen, and everybody who's worked to make this a great event. I really appreciate all the thoughtfulness you've put into organizing it and making it really so inclusive. There's so many different people here from different places, and I really appreciate that. It makes it exciting and fun. And
Donna, if I can interrupt you, I forgot to mention that we're also co-sponsored by, when you were talking about inclusivity, the Department of Communication Studies, and of course the Rick Edelman College of Communication Creative Arts Division of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. So I'm sorry I forgot you. I love you both. Both are near and dear to my heart, so I forgot to mention that. All right, Donna, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's good. It takes a lot of people to pull off events like this, and so it really does. It takes a team, so we really appreciate it. What I want to do before I start my slides is ask everybody to please have a piece of paper. I don't care if it's a scrap of paper, whatever it is, just get a piece of paper and something to write with, because I want you to be able to jot down a few things that I'm going to mention. But I really am excited to talk about the research I've been doing for the last few years into the history of women's speech. And I'm going to start my slides and speak a little bit to my slides. Then when I finish my talk, we'll open it up for questions and answers. If you have some questions, put them in the chat. Karen will be monitoring them, and we'll share them with me, and we'll get to all your questions. You can feel free to ask me about anything and everything. I really would like for this to be a mutual learning experience. A lot of the issues that I'm going to talk about are things that I'm just trying to tease out and puzzle through myself. So I look forward to this being a kind of collaborative exploration. With that, let me share my slides. Okay, good. I assume you can see them. Someone's going to let me know if you can't. But I call my talk The Secret History of Women's Speech. Why secret? Because it's the way that I express the idea that women's speech has not been well known in history. So before I go on, let me just ask a question of everybody. I want you to jot down on your piece of paper really quickly the names of 5 great speakers in history. Now, the trick is they have to be not alive. So who are great, just off the top of your head, who are some great speakers that you can think of in history? Not anybody who's alive. I'm not going to take the time to look at your answers in the chat because I want to keep moving, but keep the thought in mind while I go forward. Because in general, I've given this talk a lot, and in generally speaking, you guys may be a little different because you came to this knowing I was speaking about women's speech, but in general, people talk about men. It's always men, great men in history, great men, male orators. Of course, you can see we've got Abe Lincoln and Winston Churchill and Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And who's on the right-hand side? I can't see. I have to get my slides, my pictures out.
MLK.
Who's it? Oh, is it MLK? No,
Yeah,
there's
he's who I wrote down first.
Who's the right of Martin Luther King?
Wow.
Well, some of the others that people mention are, for
Reagan.
example,
Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, right? The great communicator, Ronald Reagan. People will talk about Billy Graham. They'll talk about Patrick Henry. It's always male speakers in history. And I wonder, I've always wondered, why should that be that the people who we lionize for their oratory and their great speaking should be men? And it informs this question that I ask, and I think we should all ask, about the making or the framing of the knowledge that we think of as history. Whose words, whose voices shape the narrative that governs the way that we think about the past? And of course, the past informs the present. And the narrative that is dominated by male voices is a very male-driven narrative. And my argument, after all the research that I've done and the reading and the thinking about it, is that that is a false narrative or a misleading narrative. So the question I asked when I first got into this project is, where are all the speeches by women? Could it be that all the great speeches in history have been given by men? So here's how this thing got started for me. One morning it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was literally waking up, looking at my cell phone, my mobile phone, and I opened up a copy of Vital Speeches of the Day. This is a publication that comes out once a month, and I've been a subscriber for umpteen years, and it's a digest, like Reader's Digest. It's a digest of important and great speeches of the day. And I opened it up and looked at it, and all the speeches were by men. I'm going to show you really quickly what I saw, but then I want to go back because I don't want you to read everything on there. But you could just glance and see at the top left, Tim Cook, CEO Apple, Mike Pence, Vice President of the United States, Li Keqiang, Premier of China. So you get the point. All of these very important men giving important speeches are what constitute Vital Speeches of the Day. So what did I do? I'm friendly with the editor of Vital Speeches. I've known him for 20 plus years. So I emailed him 7 in the morning and said, David, how come you don't have any women's speeches in this month's issue? And he sends me back an email. Now, I'm still friends with him, so please don't go sending him an email and telling you that I'm telling you this story, but he's a nice guy. But here's what he said. He said, Donna, he said, vital speeches is descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, it describes the way the world is, not the way we would like it to be. Well, at this point, 7 a.m, the flames are like shooting from the top of my head. I'm so angry at him. And I said, couldn't you at least include one woman? And he said, no, that would be tokenism. So what I want you to do is write down on your piece of paper two words, descriptive and proscriptive, because prescriptive, that's P-R-E with an E, not P-R-O. I'm going to come back to them because it's part of what I'm trying to puzzle through, this whole idea of describing the world that we live in or prescribing the world that we would like it to be. There's the vital speeches. You can see at the top, it's December 2018. Now, one of my heroes is Mary Beard. She's a classicist, a scholar of the ancient world at Cambridge. She wrote a book called Women and Power, a Manifesto. And the book came out of 2 speeches that she gave. I think her book came out in 2018. So there were speeches she gave a little bit earlier on women's voice and the silencing of women's voice. And the picture that you see, the image you see, is a Greek urn that she shows when she gives talks. It's Penelope and Telemachus in it's not the oldest, it's like almost the oldest work in Western literature, the epic poem by Homer, the Iliad. And in the first book of the Iliad, Penelope comes downstairs to the grand room where all the men are talking. And that's her son, Telemachus, on the left. And he says, go back to your room. And women's stuff. This is not a space for women. So what Mary Beard calls this is the first example in history of a man telling a woman, oh, do shut up, dear. So Mary Beard, I encourage you to look at that book, Women and Power. It's really interesting. And it put the issue of the silencing of women into the discourse. She really highlighted it. And it's really informed my thinking a lot. And she goes back, of course, to the ancient world. Now, so did I. This gentleman is Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero. We're talking like 106 BC, right? The great orator. The idea emerging in ancient history that men make the best orators. Look how he's standing with his arm outstretched. Here's his book, De Oratore, the ideal orator, ideal speaker. So the notion that great oratory, great words that make history, are a male endeavor, go back very far in Western history. And I put in a few images that I just happened to pull offline. You're familiar with all of these images. Look how the man is standing. Look who's around him. They're all men in the public forum. I love this one. Because obviously it was men who served as legislators, it's men who served as executives, it's men who voted and made chief decisions in our society and most of the Western world. So it's men who are associated with important rhetoric. I got this picture from a manual of public speaking, Eloquence of Action. And this book is intended to teach men even how to stand when they deliver a speech. It shows them how to be a powerful figure in front of an audience. So here's the question. Where are all the women? That's what I asked myself. And one thing I did is I pulled down a volume called Lend Me Your Ears. It was a famous collection of speeches edited by William Safire. He was a word maven, a language expert, and he was a speechwriter for President Nixon. And he put together this collection called Lend Me Your Ears. Lend Me Your Ears comes from William Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. And I pulled out this collection, the best speeches in the world, given in the world, and I started counting. I got out my little pencil and I started counting. And there were 225 speeches by men and 20 by women. So I thought, there's something wrong with this. It can't be the case that out of all of history, there's just 20 speeches by women that merit our attention, our appreciation, that made a difference in the world and that we can celebrate. So why is this? This sent me back to the history books and to the history lessons. And here's where the women are. This is a etching, woodcut from the 1700s. And this woman is a scold. Scold, S-C-O-L-D. That was a term for a woman who spoke words or used language that wasn't considered popular or appropriate. She was probably saying things that the men in power didn't want to hear. And what did they do to her? They punished her by dunking her in the river. This is another image of a scold. A scold is chasing her husband and he's running after her and losing his headdress. I'm laughing, but it seems so ridiculous to us. But these are the images that govern the way that our heritage of understanding of gender relations and communication. This is the branks. The branks, or branking, was used as a form of punishment, public humiliation and punishment for women who talked out of order, who were scolds, or who said things that were not appropriate. The cage, a metal contraption, was put around her head and locked. And there you can see there's a chain that binds her to the post. She was publicly humiliated and forced to stand there for a certain amount of time while people reviled her and criticized her. So the branks was an instrument of torture and humiliation, not only used for women. Some men were branked too. It was a verb, to brank, as well, but mostly women. Mostly women. This is another brank. This is a brank, or also it's called a scold's guard. It's like a medieval torture instrument, right? It's hard to believe these are real things, but these are drawings of images that actually really exist. I think they're in a museum in Cheshire, which is the north of England near the Scottish border. So branking it emerged there in northern England and southern Scotland, but it also spread throughout Western Europe. You can see this is two versions of the same device. The one on the left, you can see the bit, like a metal bit, like the bit that goes into a horse's mouth. And on the right, you can see the space for the nose. So if the woman would speak, in other words, her tongue would hit the bit. So it was meant to silence her and to punish her. Here's another one. This image is from the suffrage period when women were advocating for the vote. I mean, the suffrage period was a very large period, but this is probably from the 1860s or 70s. Women's suffrage, male suffering. And what is he suffering from? Women talking. All you can see are women's mouths all around him. They don't even have faces. This is a torture device. Well, this is an illustration from a postcard of a woman with a torture device around her head, and it is gruesome. If you've got a wife that nags, get one of these patent gags. These postcards were very popular around the time when women were getting closer to securing the vote. So 1890s, 1900, 1910, when obviously they were more of a threat, women's voices, women's power were more of a threat. I'm going to show you some more of these pictures. They are, word of warning, they are pretty gruesome, and I must be sick because I collect them. I must have about 150 different pictures like this, but I'm just going to show you a few so you can get a taste of them. There's no end to a woman's tongue. This is an image called a vipering tongue lock. Vipering refers to a viper or a snake, right? I mean, it's a terrible, it's an insult. It's horrible to associate a woman's tongue to a snake's tongue. Oh, and by the way, they're from all different countries. This one's a German. They've sewn her lip shut. And this one, I put this one in because obviously it's gruesome. A woman's getting her tongue cut, but here you go. You can go on eBay and buy a framed picture of a woman having her tongue cut off. Why? I mean, that wouldn't be accepted for other groups, I don't think, a picture of torture like that. Anyway, don't get me started, but if you go on eBay and put in postcard, humorous, woman's tongue, woman's lips, you can find these images. And my question is, what is humorous about them? Why are they considered humorous images? I think this is the last one. It's kind of cute. I'd rather kiss her than hear her talk, but not so cute. It's pretty patronizing. I forgot about this one. The trouble with women, they have mouths. This is from the 50s. Okay, so what did I do? By this time, you can tell I got really angry. And anger is a great motivator, you guys. When something makes you angry, that's a signal that maybe you have to do something about it. I set up within 3 weeks of talking to the editor at Vital Speeches, I set up a website called Speaking While Female. And I just started loading it up with speeches by women, all kinds of speeches by women that I could find from all over the world. It now has more than 3,000 speeches. Some of them are not even in English because I haven't got the resources to translate them. I'm always looking for translators. But the idea behind this, the impulse is that any girl or woman around the world, wherever she is, can go online and see an example of a woman speaking, a powerful woman speaking. So I've got transcripts. I have, in some cases, video, and in some cases, just audio. And this is really sending a signal to women that our voices matter in history, that our voices have made history, and that the old narrative that it was just men who spoke and gave the important speeches in history is a dusty one that we should consign to the dustbin. Okay, I want to talk for a minute about the idea of silence. Were women silenced? So Mary Beard talks about the whole notion of women being silenced throughout history. And I understand that and appreciate that. But at the same time, the more and more I began to uncover speeches by women, the more I wondered, what is the relationship between silence and speaking? Until one day, it really occurred to me that if women are being silenced, it's only because they were speaking. They wouldn't be silenced if they were silent to begin with. So there is a kind of dialectic or a back and forth between the silencing and the speaking and the silencing and the speaking. And you see that throughout history. Women have spoken up, and then there was a backlash or there was resistance to it. They were criticized. They were the recipients of every kind of projectile that you can imagine. I mean, things thrown at them, rotten eggs and fruit and cold water and booing and hissing. And you think Twitter's bad. Well, these women who spoke up in the past received the worst kind of PR. I mean, the worst kind of reviews, and their names and reputations were tarnished because they used their voices in public. So I want you to remember that and think about this. And I hope we'll talk about the silencing and the speaking, two sides of the same coin. This is the URL for the speech archive. So I hope you'll jot it down and take a look and use it. Use it in your research, use it in your papers, use it to inform your thinking about your classes in history and every other subject, and share it with other people because it's a free resource and it will be that way in perpetuity. I want it always to be free and available to anybody who has the internet. Okay, now I want to go back for just a minute to what my friend and colleague, the editor of Vital Speeches said. Remember, he said, Vital Speeches is descriptive, Donna. It's not prescriptive. And the reason I brought this up again is I've started thinking a lot about what that means. Descriptive, well, you know what that comes from, more or less, to describe, the Latin root, right? That you look out in the world and you see the world, or if you should happen to be vision impaired, you still look out in a metaphoric sense at the world in front of you and you describe what you see. Prescriptive means you impose a vision on the world, just like a doctor would write a prescription. And there's an order. So I'm only going to look at this and this and this. I'm going to follow these orders. So what does it mean to say descriptive, that our publication is descriptive, not prescriptive? Well, what I think he meant was that we describe the way the world is, meaning we share the speeches of men in positions of power, right? You saw the list. The Premier of China, the CEO of the World Bank, legislators, men who have positions of authority and influence. But what it doesn't include is women whose voices were also important, but they may not have been or weren't throughout much of history in positions of power. But does that mean that their voices weren't important? Does that mean that the subject matter that they addressed wasn't important? Does it mean that what they had to say isn't historic and worthy of our attention and appreciation and analysis? So this back and forth, this tension, I would say, between description and prescription is a very fruitful one to think about when we think about the past and how we evaluate what matters. I don't know that I would say that my work is descriptive or prescriptive. I'm not trying to impose my vision on the past, but on the other hand, I am valuing women's voices, and I'm specifically looking for women's voices. And so in that sense, it is a prescriptive endeavor. Okay, so the question is, I've raised it already, but I want to make sure that we are focused on a story, right? Because history is a story, or the American story, the American project, or the stories of individual women whose story counts and which storytellers count. And here's just a few that I'll throw out. This is Jeanette Rankin. She was a campaigner in Montana, her home state of Montana, for the women's vote. She was such a great speaker that she ran for state office, for state legislature, and the people of Montana sent her to Washington, D.C. to be the congresswoman. And when she was in Washington, she was the woman who introduced the resolution that became the 19th Amendment that granted women of America federal right to vote, making Jeanette Rankin the only woman to legally vote for the right of women to have the vote. And she's standing on the balcony of the office of the National American Women's Suffrage Association in Washington, D.C. This is Lucy Branham. She was a suffragist from Baltimore. And what I love about this picture is you can see she's wearing a uniform. She was incarcerated in the Occoquan workhouse in Virginia, south of Washington, D.C., in Lorton, Virginia, with something like 30 other women in what was called the Night of Terror. They were all protesting in front of the White House for suffrage. They were scooped up, arrested, charged, and incarcerated down in Lorton, and really abused, mistreated there. And when they got out, what did Lucy do? She got right back on the stump. Either she's just gotten out of prison in this picture, or she put on her uniform for her subsequent speeches. But I love it because you can see the uniform, you can see the sash of the suffragists, the purple, white, yellow sash. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see a kind of a early form of a movie camera too, or news camera. So she's a hero of mine. This woman, I don't know who she is, but I love this picture. She's obviously in a moving car. She's speaking, I'm sure she's speaking for suffrage from the back of a moving car. And you can tell that it's moving because the way her body's kind of leaning to the left. So the car's in motion, she's speaking, she's making a point. And I get very excited when I see women with their hands in the air making a point like that. And also I love pictures of women at the microphone. This is Emmeline Pankhurst, the great British suffragette. And look how she's holding her arm. I love that picture. Rosa Luxemburg, who was, Rose Schneiderman, the wrong Rose. Rose Schneiderman, she was a speaker for the Trade Union League. She was called the Red Rose of Anarchy because she had flaming red hair. She was 4'9", but when she went on the podium to speak, she had a very powerful voice. She spoke very movingly, and she spoke all the time for the Trade Union League, for workers to unionize, specifically women workers in the garment industry. She was an immigrant from Poland. This is the great Fannie Lou Hamer from Mississippi, who spoke out for civil rights and the right to vote without harassment and infringement of voting rights, particularly for Black Americans in the South, in the Deep South. I don't know who this woman is, but I love this picture. I love her megaphone. It's a more recent picture. Oh, this is Toshiko Mori. You may remember him. He was on the steering committee of the Olympics in Tokyo, and he was in a meeting. This was in the winter of 2021. He was in a meeting and he said that women talk too much, basically. don't let more women on our executive committee because they'll just talk too much. And of course, it sparked an outcry. And here's the young woman, a college student, I think she was 22 years old, Momoko Nojo, who launched a petition with the hashtag Don't Be Silent and collected 150,000 names demanding that he step down, which he did within 3 weeks. So she used her voice. This is my book. Thank you, Julie, for plugging my book. The book is going to come out in time for Women's History next March. Speaking While Female, 75 Extraordinary Speeches by American Women, telling the story of American history from 1737 to I missed it by a century, 1637 to the present. The most recent speech is 2021. 75 speeches by American women. I'm so excited, and I hope you'll get the book and help me spread the word about it when it comes out. So, whose words will we remember? That's the question I want to leave you with, and that's the question I hope we can discuss in the Q&A, because your voice matters. Your voice matters. Everybody here today has a powerful voice. Everybody here today has expertise and knowledge that nobody else in the world has. We are all unique. We have so many big problems in this world: governance problems, climate problems, environmental problems, so many problems that need your voice, your advocacy. So I encourage you to put your voice out into the world. And here's where I want you to get out that piece of paper, because I want you to write this down. Here's a little exercise for you. Write this sentence down. In the next week, 2 weeks, month, in the next day, I don't care when it is. This is just for you. Nobody else is going to see it. In the next whatever, I will use my voice to speak about. This is your opportunity to make a pledge to yourself, make a commitment that you're going to use your voice. And if you're not used to doing it, this is a chance for you to practice doing it and get used to it. Because the more you do it, the easier it gets. I don't care whether it's in your house of worship, it's among your peer group, it's in a class, whether it's in any other circumstance. I want you to stand up and use your voice and get used to it. So what does a powerful woman speaker look like? She looks like every one of us. Every one of us. Thank you all. Let me finish sharing my slides, and I look forward to hearing your questions and having some conversation.
Thank you so much. It's so fascinating. And again, I know quite a few folks, Donna, on our call have been to other presentations that we've had and other workshops. And like I said, we normally go straight into the kind of a Q&A. But as I said at the beginning, I really wanted Donna to share some of these images for you. I've studied this forever. I've been teaching at Rowan for 25 years and studying communication for most of my life, it seems like. My undergraduate degree and both my graduate degrees are in it. And I was certainly aware of the silencing of women. Was one of the reasons that I got interested in the field. But I personally had not seen some of the postcard imagery before. So I think it's so important. You know, I was startled and shocked when I saw it before. So I think it's so important for, I know we have lots and lots of students here today, to kind of recognize that's what, the history actually was. And I'm sure that you said you had hundreds of those images?
140.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. And another thing that was fascinating to me, and I know some of my students that take images of gender and pop culture with me this semester are on this call. And we have spent a good chunk of the beginning of the semester talking about images in advertising, which are everywhere. And I'm sure if you're familiar with there's a documentary called Killing Us Softly. I think there's 4 of them now. But one of the things that Jean Kilbourne talks about there is this imaging of silencing, that you don't really recognize it is silencing until you think about it in those terms. Body posture, covering their mouths. I mean, obviously some of the ads are misogynistic, but even sort of body posture versus, and I can understand why you would like the open posturing of some of those speakers because they are taking up space. Because a lot of this is about taking up space as well, which I think is fascinating to me. So I know quite a few of our students, we'd asked them to come up with questions before, and a lot of them asked how you got involved in the debate database. And I think that's terrific. Let's talk a little bit about that prescriptive and descriptive again, because what struck me about it was it's only because I heard when you're talking about descriptive, prescriptive, and that's certainly the mantra of the status quo. We're just, they talk about it in terms of women's sports. I think we have a associate director of the NCAA who might be on the call. They talk about it. We have a whole thing in sports communication, women's sports. Well, people just don't want to watch women's sports. We're not mandating that. That's just the description. But
things are. This is how things are.
Right. Exactly. But then your point about who gets to tell the story, and my students have heard this in lots of classes that I teach. It's all about who gets to tell the story. So as you said, it's not that those speeches don't exist. It's what we're choosing. So, God bless your friend David, but he's perpetuating, without knowing it, it's like perpetuating that idea. Do you feel like you're helping change the description with your works?
Well, bit by bit, but I'll tell you, I really want to get a bigger megaphone. So that's why I'm so grateful to you. But to just go back for a minute, this is something that I've thought a lot about, but there are obviously thousands and thousands and thousands of speeches that we'll never know about because nobody wrote them down. That goes for men as well as women. But how does a speech get recorded? First of all, somebody has to make a transcript. Generally speaking, that person is a journalist. Not always. If you go to a conference, many conferences would have an official person who's the transcriber. But let's say you have hold a meeting on any subject under the sun, and a journalist thinks it's important. Well, if a woman's speaking, in the past, there was a high likelihood that a journalist wouldn't go because the journalist wouldn't think it was an important event. What was the woman speaking about? Maybe she was speaking about education, or maybe she was speaking about sanitation or prison reform or something that that fell within the reformatory work that women were so interested in. The journalist doesn't show up. Journalist doesn't make a transcription. The newspaper's not going to publish it. If the journalist never makes a transcription, the newspaper doesn't publish it. No one's going to put it in any anthologies. So the net result is the history books don't have a record of what women said. Now, what I hope, you asked if my work is having an impact. What I always ask my audiences is to join me in the quest or the search for speeches by women. They are out there in archives. They're out there in old newspapers, some of which are online and we have access to, some of which we don't, some of which require paid subscriptions that I don't have a subscription to, but some of them are in diaries. Some of them are up in old attics, in people's attics. I really want people to keep in mind that this is an excavation project and that all of us can be involved in the excavation and reclamation of women's voices, because so many of them were lost. I feel like it's incumbent upon us to seek out and find and publish the ones that we can find that are existing.
And it is very exciting to do that. I think I told you before that I've done work on Southern suffrage, which is an interesting, complicated field of inquiry, and did some work on a woman named Lila Mae Valentine, and she was the president of the Equal Suffrage League of Virginia. And I found her speeches at the archives at the Library of Virginia. And it's fascinating because it's in their own handwriting and you have to transcribe it, but you really do feel like you're discovering gold when you come across these things. So it's really exciting.
So if you found those, we probably found there's a draft that she wrote herself. Right. So when she stood up and made the speech, it's likely that nobody recorded it.
Right. I mean, the Richmond Times-Dispatch would sometimes do that, but you're right. You're right, because it would have been seen as, because she was a champion of things like, education. She was speaking in Virginia during a time period. Obviously, she was in the early 1900s. So, she was talking about equality of races at a time where that would not have been acceptable. So, to a Richmond Times-Dispatch audience, right? So, absolutely. Let me, I know our students had a lot of these questions, so let me shift gears a little bit. I mean, they're obviously quite related, but you have made a career out of not only this passion project you have, but also speech writing. So and again, we have a lot of communication majors on the call. I think at one point we had 102 people, and then plus a couple whole classrooms. I think there's a few classrooms, but I know there's an honors public speaking class. They're talking about writing speeches. So how did you become a speechwriter? How did you get into that?
Well, I was a journalist for a long time, and journalism is where I learned how to ask questions, and then I would say distill and synthesize information quickly, usually with your writing under the gun. Mm-hmm. So I was a journalist for a long time, and then I started doing some communications work. I was living in London at the time, and I did some communications work in London, and then a guy across the hall needed a speech. So that was my first speech. And then the guy turned out to be an executive, and I wrote for him for a few years when I lived in London, which was quite fun because I had to write using British English when I could. Oh. Instead of, it was railways instead of railroads, and anyway, that was fun for a lover of language. That was fun. But I shifted into it. Then when I moved back to the States, I came back and specifically looked for opportunities to do speech writing because it is fun. It's just fun it's ideas and language. You get to write with a voice. You get to write passionately. You don't have to mind the rules of punctuation. You write you write for the ear, not the eye. So you write in the way that the words will be uttered, and you write to make an impact. So that's really a lot of fun. So if you want to go into speech writing, if that's something that appeals to you, I urge you to, get a background in writing, do something that will hone your writing chops, and look for opportunities in the PR world. Because generally speaking, speech writing falls under the PR category. Now you could write political speeches, which I've never done, or you could work in the world of business. But generally speaking, you look for opportunities where your language skills and your reasoning skills will be valued.
One thing I was just thinking of, and it just flitted through my head when you were talking about speaking for the ear. I mean, writing for the ear, because one of our students had asked, how is writing a speech different from writing an essay? And it tickled me when I read the question, because when I was in graduate school, one of our professors would say, a speech is not an essay on its hind legs, which actually doesn't make any sense, but it's funny. But we all knew what he meant. So how is it? Can you elaborate on that, about how that's different to write? I think that's going to be really relevant to our students right now who are in public speaking too, right? Because a lot of our students will want to write the whole thing out and write an essay and then just get up and speak it. But that's really not what you should do, is it?
No, it's not what you should do. But in the early days when I would write speeches, I would write it all out word for word. And then as I went on through the years, I discovered that it's really more useful for the speaker in general to give bullet points and let the speaker use his or her own language and words. But the speaker has to be comfortable with that. But no, it's quite different from an essay. It has a different flow, it has a different logic, and it has different language. With a speech, there's generally an arc to it. Generally, broadly speaking, you have a kind of introduction that has to be sexy, right? You want to bring people in. You want to draw people in with something that gets their attention, because the beginning of the speech is critical. If you lose them at the beginning, they're going to be lost the whole time. So you draw them in with some kind of anecdote or dramatic opening. Then you want to make your argument. You usually want to have 1 point. If you try and have 3, it's too many. Because I always say nobody ever walked out of a speech and said, she made 3 really great points. It's too much for us to remember. So make 1 point and then give some examples. So generally make an argument. The argument might be, voting is critical to our democracy. And two points. 1 point would be, elected officials can't represent our ideas unless everybody votes. And 2 would be voting is the franchise that keeps our elected officials honest. I don't know. So you make 2 points and then you want to wrap it up. And you want to wrap it up in a way that generally has what we call a CTA, a call to arms. In other words, a speech, generally speaking, a speech is not powerful unless it asks the audience to do something. That's generally true no matter what kind of speech it is. I mean, even if it's a eulogy that you're giving for someone who's deceased, generally you're calling on the audience to mourn together or to think of the person in a positive way, to learn a lesson from the person's exemplary life. I mean, you're almost always asking the audience to do something. So if you follow that general outline, your speech will have a flow to it. And that's different from what you're doing with an essay. It's quite different.
Do you find yourself writing differently for men versus women? Because I know you've written both for men and women. And then my follow-up question would be, and this is a hotly debated topic in rhetorical studies, which is where my work is done, is there such thing as a feminine style and a masculine style?
Well, my answer to the first question is no. And my answer to the second question is no. No, I don't write differently for men or women. And no, I don't personally believe there is a feminine and masculine style. I mean, of course, we all wonder about this nature versus nurture question. Are women intrinsically different from men? And, I don't think I can say anything that would really add a lot of insight to this age-old debate. But in my speech writing experience, I don't find women and men to be different in subject matter or in the way that they express themselves.
Right. I have found in some of my students' essays through the years when they're writing, maybe in their speaking as well. Right now, I'm teaching more classes where there's writing. That sometimes much more my female students and perhaps female students of color or people of color in my classes, they will hedge. There's a hedging to it instead of making a strong claim. And I actually had a couple of students semesters ago who were like, oh my gosh, it was a women's studies class. And they're like, I can't believe I'm doing that. But there was like an implicit unsuredness that I think we're conditioned to have, maybe. I don't know, where it's instead of making the argument and the claims and whatever, it was like, it might be this, or one could maybe argue this. I don't know if you've thought anything about that. I know Robin Lakoff talks about that.
If you ask me whether women and men express themselves differently, I do think there is a difference. And I do think it's harder for women to speak. It's harder for women to speak confidently. And yes, women do back into their arguments more than men do. Not every woman and not every man is a strong speaker, but I always think of it as more women than most men. More women than most men tend to undermine themselves when they speak and not speak as confidently. And I see those as very heavily socialized attributes or traits.
Right.
And they stem also from women's socialized situation. One of the examples I give to my corporate clients is, suppose the boss, has an assignment. The boss walks down the hall and he pops into Mary's office and he says, Mary, we've got a speech coming up next week in Singapore at the last minute. Can you go? And Mary says, oh gosh, I've got the kids and I've got grandma and I've got this and that, because she's running the house as well as, doing her work. Well, then he keeps going and he pops his head into Larry's office and says, Larry, can you go next week and give a speech in Singapore? And Larry says, sure, I'll go. So it's not a level playing field. As long as it's not a level playing field, women and men. But see, this has ripple effects because Larry, is that his name I gave it? Larry goes to Singapore. Larry gives the speech. Larry gets more experience. Larry becomes a more confident and a better, more capable speaker because he has more experience. Larry meets some important people over there and forges some business relationships, and he comes home bringing some business with him. So now all of a sudden he's a rainmaker. He's also had a chance to talk up the business, so he's a brand ambassador. He gets his name quoted in the press or in a industry newsletter. So Larry's a star, and I forgot the woman's name, Mary. Mary is not. Her star is not shining as brightly. So that is a real problem, and it's not because Mary is intrinsically any different from Larry in terms of expression or ability. It's because situationally it's harder for Mary. So all those benefits that come from being a thought leader, all those benefits that come from putting your voice into the public square don't accrue to the Marys of the world as easily as they do to the Larrys of the world.
Right. Exactly. Let me see if I have other questions, but if I want people to go ahead and start putting their questions in the chat, if you would, so that, because I don't want to take up all of the time, so you can go ahead and put your questions in the chat. I mean, I have a million questions for you, but if you could do that, that would be great. So in terms of your career, you talked about going in public speaking. Were you a journalism major, or your graduate degrees in journalism?
I was a history major, and then I got a graduate degree in English literature.
Okay.
Two very unpractical subjects.
What kind of classes would you suggest our students take if they're interested in doing something in speech writing and along those lines? And then second to that is, if you could talk a little bit more about getting into the field, about how would you cold call people? Would you try to find a job?
Okay, so the first thing is, what kind of classes should you take? I am a big believer that you should study whatever turns you on. And whatever it is you study, you will find a way to mine insights and develop a level of sophistication in your material that will stand you in good stead the rest of your life. And that goes for studying communications. It goes for studying physics. It goes for studying, engineering. Every field has expertise, and every field has insight. And the deeper, it's one of those curious things about life, is the deeper you go into a subject, the bigger it gets and the broader it gets. And so I think students should study whatever they like. But if you want to be a writer, you have to also have some communication skills. And some of the people who study sciences or mathematics don't develop their language skills as well. But one of my good friends is a speechwriter, very successful. Speechwriter, makes a lot of money, and he's a physics major. He just has an interesting way of looking at the world. He understands all kinds of things that I don't. So he has a different voice than I have. And when he works with the client, he's able to tease out different kinds of insights, different kinds of relationships between ideas and thoughts, because he's a different person. And he's a different person because of his, at least partly because of his educational background.
It's interesting. We had a speaker last February, I think it was, Karen, right, who is a Pfizer scientist who started her own podcast and all of this. It comes to communication from such a different angle as well, which is fascinating.
Well, the main thing about learning is being delighted by your topic. If you're interested in your topic, it doesn't feel like work, and right. That's something I learned from Martha. I remember Martha Stewart articulated that very powerfully, because she is really one of the most curious people that I know. And she's also happens to be an insomniac, but she would stay up all night reading a book on furniture. She would be, reading a book on Georgian furniture at 3 a.m. because she was interested in it. She just wanted more and more knowledge. And like I said, it's like anything. When you get into it, it becomes infinitely interesting. So I believe that, my belief is that education, at least undergraduate education, should teach you how to be curious and teach you the splendor, the glory of having your curiosity rewarded, teaching you how wonderful it is to learn about the world. So if physics turns you on, study
it's I love it. It's a beautiful thought. It's a sentiment, and one that I echo. And it's been difficult the past few years with teaching college, because obviously learning is what I love and have a passion for. And I'm so excited. And I certainly have students who are like that as well. But the culture has shifted that you go to college to get a job. You don't go to college to learn. So again, I've been blessed with some really fantastic students who are intellectually curious. But I see that a lot, even with my own children, where a lot of their friends were like, well, one of mine is, I think I mentioned to you, is a theater, wants to go into the theater. And some of his friends are like, oh, my parents won't let me major in theater. And I'm like, you do what you love, and the rest will hopefully follow.
Well, you could flip it around and say, if you don't do what you love, it's not going to follow.
Right.
Study something that you don't like just because it's practical. The odds are pretty large that you won't stay in that career. If you don't love it, it's very hard to stick with something that's not bringing you pleasure.
Joy.
Yeah.
Bringing you joy.
So the second thing that you asked about getting in the field, I have a recommendation for everybody. I run a group for speechwriters on LinkedIn. I enjoy LinkedIn and I use it a lot. And I have a group called Leadership Communications Roundtable. And so anybody can join. And that's a forum where a lot of speechwriters and executive communicators and leadership communicators, people jump in and ask questions and help one another and share articles. And it's all about leadership communication.
And that's called what? Can you say that again for us? I'm trying to fix my lighting too. It's driving me bananas. It's
Leadership Communication Roundtable. And you can find it in
Communication Roundtable.
You can find it in the groups on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And anybody can join, and you can lurk and just learn from people, or you can, when you're a member, you can look through other members, and you could ask if you want a mentor. You could say, I want to go into speechwriting. Is there somebody here who would mentor me? Or you could reach out to specific people and say, could I hop on a call and ask how you got started in speechwriting? People will help you.
That's a very wonderful resource. Thank you.
Supportive group.
That's a fantastic resource for the students. So please take advantage of that. And thank you so much for sharing that. That's
I'm pretty strict about curating it. I go in most days and I delete all the stuff. People post things about how to be a great leader. And I even once in a while I jump in and I put in a little warning and say, this is not a group about leadership in general. This is not a group about gender diversity. This is a group about leadership communications. And still people post all kinds of stuff, but I'm pretty good at reading it out. So we stay pretty true to our purpose, which is how do we communicate ideas powerfully and persuasively? So about influence, persuasion, language, and the craft of the expression of ideas.
We do have a question from the group. Again, we still have like 80 people. I'm so excited everyone can join us today. Who are you hoping would be the best audience for your book? And what other projects are you working on that highlight or accentuate this project? Oh, I know some of this already, but I'll let you talk because she's got some really cool things.
The ideal reader for my book, my dream, my pie in the sky dream is that my book would be in every library across the country. Of course, there's hundreds of thousands of libraries, but
like a public library and an academic library.
I really do. I want young girls to know. I mean, I look ahead and I see all the problems we have, and I want young girls to know that we have an accessible and inspirational history of women speaking. That it's not just a male history that we're inheriting, but that we have four mothers or antecedents who did this before us. And I also want women interested in empowerment, women's voice and agency, and in classrooms, in as much as they use books anymore. I know a lot of them use course packs or don't use books anymore, but I want this book to be in a companion piece to a history book, a social studies book, a humanities book that tells the story of how we got here and doesn't include women's voices. I want this to be a corrective to that. So where do I want the book to be? everywhere.
And other projects that you're working on?
I'm just trying to get the book out.
But you do have that. Can you talk about the one that you're doing about speech a day?
Oh, I have another book that I want to do, but I have to get this one done first. But the one that I also want to do is it's a calendar type book, not a calendar, but a book that's inspired by a calendar, and it has every day of the year in it. So January 1, January 2, January 3, March 1, March 2, March 3. Every day, 365 days was a day that a woman gave a speech, an important speech in history. And I have a very long spreadsheet with thousands of speeches in it. So when I get down to doing it, I'll pick an important speech for each day of the year, proving that there's not a day in the calendar that we can't celebrate a historic speech by a woman.
I love it. I love it. One of our participants wants to know, what is your favorite speech? I have a feeling this is like picking your favorite child. Do you have
That's one question I don't like to answer because it depends on, what day it is.
Do you have any favorites?
When I finish editing the book, I'm going to get back into LinkedIn, and I really enjoy my LinkedIn community, and I post a lot on LinkedIn, and I post articles about women's speeches in history, and I always love the one I'm writing about most.
And that's I can believe that. And then I wanted to mention earlier, was it Lucy Burns you were talking about?
Lucy Burns was
yes.
the one. Yeah, but she is featured in the Lucy Burns Museum, which is in Lorton, Virginia.
Well, I wanted to let our students know that there's some of them on the call. I'm trying to think if they've ever, Ashley, I don't know if you've watched this. Some of my classes, I have them watch. Oh, some of you should have seen it. Iron Jawed Angels. Dakota Jones is on this call, I think. Sorry, Dakota, for calling you out. But she's watched that movie. There's a movie called Iron Jawed Angels. Hilary Swank is in it, Julia Ormond, Patrick Dempsey.
I have not seen it.
It came out on HBO. You have to watch it. And it's about Alice Paul, who was a suffragist during that whole, she was the leader of the Congressional Union. And so I encourage everybody to go watch Iron Jawed Angels. I think you can find it on Amazon. It's fascinating. But related to that, if that was interesting to you, we have the Alice Paul Institute, which is in Mount Laurel. That's right, Karen, not Mount Holly, right? Sometimes I get those two. It's in Mount Laurel, where there's a museum. And Donna, the next time you're around, we'll visit. But there's the Alice Paul Institute, there's a house museum, and some of the film was filmed there. And it's interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to go. Alice Paul was a colleague of Lucy Burns. So they worked together. I think they met in England. They were by Emmeline Pankhurst, and her militant push for suffrage. So the Lucy Burns Museum is worth a visit. And no, I haven't yet been to
Alice Paul. You have to go to Alice Paul Institute. So I used to take my students there, kind of pre-pandemic, we would go. And you should also check out Iron Jawed Angels. It's a really great film. And it does. One of the reasons that I show it is because, and that's again why I wanted you to show these images, because to hear about the silencing of women, the violence against women, particularly women of color, you can understand it intellectually, but would you see it or hear it, or different senses of understanding it, I think it affects. So I know a lot of my students, after they watch that film, they're like, oh my gosh, I really have to go vote, because what women went through to get the vote. We know it intellectually, but viewing something like that. We have another couple of questions. Oh, we have quite a few. This is exciting. Do you believe society is improving in terms of not suppressing women's voices? So, right. So, do you feel like we improve? I talk about history as sort of being like in waves, by personal opinion. We kind of go up and down, but I would love to know your opinion.
No, if you're talking about our society, I think it's obvious that it has. So just look around and we see women speaking out everywhere. And just in the last, I've been working on this for maybe a decade. I've been thinking about it and writing about it. And we've seen a sea change. I mean, you remember all that flap about manels? Nobody talks about manels anymore, because you just cannot have a panel at a conference that's all men. You'll get called out and shamed, and quite rightly. It doesn't happen because we've changed. I mean, just in the last few years, we've seen a lot of changes. And younger women are growing up at a time when they don't have this legacy of thinking they need to keep their mouths shut. So yes, we still have a problem, but it is getting better. But I want to point out that this is in our society we're talking about, and in Western societies. But there's a lot of places in the world where women cannot use their voices.
Absolutely.
And I think about them, and I write about them. I mean, we obviously know about the headlines in Iran.
I was just going to mention Iran. Yep.
A lot of countries where free speech is suppressed, and you can't open your mouth and say what you think. Many hundreds of millions of people live like that in the world. So, when you say are we getting better? It depends on where you're talking about.
Right. I think we're very Western and U.S. centric on this call, but absolutely, when you look at globally, yeah. Let's see, what else? How can we appreciate women speakers more often, especially in a male-dominated public speaker world? Well, that's an interesting question.
Well, I think we all communicate in our daily lives in many ways. We communicate to our friends and family and our classes and in our projects and online. And I think that we can all make a conscious effort to pay attention when women speak, to elevate and lift up and amplify their voices when we agree with it and appreciate it. That's all. I think it's not a small gesture. That's a large gesture.
It is. And things like interrupting, and you were talking about manners, but like mansplaining and all of that, to be cognizant of your own voice in your own space and taking up. I struggle with that because I am a big talker of, in meetings, taking up all the space and recognizing I'm one voice. I need to let other people talk. Which, by the way, I think a lot is based on my history of being told, not by my lovely parents, but by classmates and that sort of thing, right? You talk too much, you should not, so I sort of fought back, but now I need to let other people speak as well.
We all try to calibrate our public performance and presentation.
Right, absolutely. Anything that you would like to leave us with? We're right about time to be done. Anything that you would like for us to? I want to enlist everybody in. It's not my army, in the army of women speakers. I should take that back because I don't like a militaristic metaphor. But I want to enlist everybody to use their voices. It really is important that we not hold back, and that we appreciate how important it is in our democracy that we have different points of view that are expressed. That's why I care so much about debate. Different points of view that are expressed and aired and appreciated with civility. That we appreciate the cacophony of voices that our democracy allows and respect other voices, but that we value our own voices, and that we know that it's not a virtue to keep quiet. That we depend on all voices in a democracy to contribute. And a perfect way to use your voice today is to go and vote. So if you've not gone and voted yet, please do so. Every vote counts. Every voice matters. Donna, as always, it's delightful speaking with you. I'm thrilled that you joined us today. The book will be coming out on Amazon at some point, right? So it's easy.
In a few weeks. We have to get the pub date. As soon as we get the publishing date, it'll go up on Amazon. It'll be in a few weeks.
So it's super exciting. So thank you so much to everyone who took time out of your busy day, out of your election day, to join us. We're always thrilled. We'll be having more workshops, both with us and our sister affiliates. So we hope to see you there soon, and hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks again.